Buongiorno a tutti. Hello, good morning from Pittsburgh. Jan Christoph, it's so good to see you. And I really wish I could be with you in Torino this morning. It is about 4:48 a.m. here in Pittsburgh, so I'm a little bit sleepy. But I'm looking forward to spending a bit of time with you this morning. Oops, I'm not seeing my slides. Is it possible to see my slides? Thank you. One of the things that has happened in the last few years is an explosion of how we talk about ethics. It seems like the word ethics is everywhere. And it's made me and some of the people that I research with ask, what are we talking about when we're talking about ethics? One way that we frequently talk about ethics is to use something like this, a famous thought problem called the trolley problem. Maybe some of you know this, but if you don't, it goes something like this. There is a trolley going down the tracks very, very fast. And in front of the trolley, there are 5 people tied to the tracks. You are the person holding that switch back there. If you throw the switch, you will divert the trolley. And as you divert the trolley, you will run over 1 person, but you will avoid killing 5. What do you do? Now, if we were in the room and I ask you this question, I'd ask you to raise your hands, and I can't see your hands this morning. So what would you do? How many of you would let the trolley keep going and run over the 5 people? Maybe a couple of you would say that would be the right thing to do, because that way you, as the switch thrower, is not involved. You just let the trolley run its course. Some of you, maybe more of you, would say, no, it's better to throw the switch. And I could then say, well, how many of you wish I wouldn't ask this question? And probably more of you would laugh and say, please don't ask me this question. Well, there's a variant on the trolley problem. Let's say you are standing on top of a bridge and you see an out-of-control trolley running down the track and it's going to run over 5 people. What do? You notice that right next to you is a very large person. If you throw the large person off the bridge, you'll stop the trolley. Is that permissible? What kind of world is that? And probably more of you, if we were all in the same room, would laugh and say, yes, okay, I don't like this one very much either. These 2 different problems were put forward by 2 different philosophers, both women. Philippa Foot is the person who introduced the first trolley problem. And then Judith Jarvis Thomson introduced the fat man problem, as she referred to it, the second trolley problem in 1985. She updated it. And we've used these different examples as a way to talk about the trade-offs of ethics, frequently around things like around autonomous vehicles. What happens if they strike a person? What kind of trade-off could we train a technology to make? What kind of trade-offs are okay? Now, trolley problems are problematic. And I think we all know that. And if you felt at all uncomfortable or like this is too limited a way to talk about the ethics of technology, you would not be in poor company. Trolley problems are actually a part of popular culture. Maybe some of you know the TV show The Good Place. This is a television show, a situation comedy about ethics. And here is a trolley problem taking place in real time. There are trolley problem memes. This is from a Reddit forum and then later a Facebook group that collects trolley problem memes and shows different ways of approaching them. There's even a trolley problem mug with the trolley problem guy on it. I own this mug, I'm proud to say. I should have brought it up here this morning for my coffee. And here's a trolley problem meme that I like a lot. And the trolley salesman slaps the roof of the trolley and says, "This bad boy can fit so much ethics in it." And this is my favorite. I'm not able to play the sound for you, but a father says to his son, "Uh-oh, here comes a trolley. It's going down this track. What do you think I should do?" And the little boy takes the one figure, moves it over to the other track, and he announces, "Uh-oh," as he does this. And I think a lot of us feel like the kinds of questions and framing around trolley problems and ethics that we're forced to make feel a little bit like this, uh-oh. 22 million people have watched this YouTube video, maybe even more. And I think that that, again, shows just how much these framings stick in our mind, yet they're not quite appropriate enough. In Santa Clara, there is the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics, and for many years they have looked at the ethics of technology and designed tools and frameworks to educate people about the trade-offs of ethics. And one of the things they point out is that talking about what ethics is not is actually easier than talking about what ethics is. So for instance, they say that ethics is not feelings, although it might have something to do with how we feel about things, certainly. Ethics is not religion, although religion tends to embody different kinds of ethics. Ethics is not law, although law often instantiates ethics. Ethics is not science. But what ethics is, the Markkula Center will point out, is one of typically five different kinds of frameworks: utilitarian, rights, fairness, justice, common good, and virtue. I'll go over these very quickly so we have a little bit of a framing about how we can talk about ethics. So utilitarian ethics, that's the classic trolley problem. It's obligatory under utilitarian ethics, and not only permissible, but it's the best option if you steer the trolley from one track to the other. It's the greatest balance of goods over harms. Then there's the question of rights. That's something that we saw when we were looking at the problem with throwing the person over the bridge, right? That infringed upon the rights of that person who just happened to be going over the bridge that day. So in a rights framework, we try to protect everyone's ethical rights and protecting the rights about the choices of the kind of life that somebody might like to live. There are fairness and justice frameworks. Aristotle said that equals should be treated equally. So ethical action should treat all humans equally. Or if it's got to be unequal, it should be some kind of defensible standard. The common good approach. All individuals in a community are bound together by common values, by common goals. And this is what society is made up of. And so common goods leads to things that people share in common: cultural institutions, public safety, public transportation, civil liberties. These are all examples of common goods that follow from a common goods framework. And then finally, virtue ethics. And these are the kinds of habits of character that allow us to act to our highest potential. So before you take an action under virtue ethics, you might say, what kind of person will I become if I do this? And some of the virtues we talk about include honesty, courage, compassion, self-control, generosity, tolerance, love, and so on. Some of the things that make us the highest kind of human that we could be. So these are 5 different approaches to ethics that the Markkula Center outlines in their frameworks. But frequently, when we talk about AI and ethics, these frameworks are not usually how ethics is discussed. Which leads me to my research question for the last 3 years. What are we really talking about when we're talking about AI ethics? So in the last several years, since 2017, 2018, there have been published some 300 different ethics frameworks, toolkits, principles, codes of conduct, oaths, checklists, and manifestos. I have to continually update this number when I write about this work because they're growing and growing. We still see that at their core, they have a number of commonalities. For example, the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard created this visualization showing AI ethics frameworks on a kind of broader thematic and domain-based spectrum. I know it's probably pretty hard to see this, and some of these slides might be quite detailed. The Department of Defense in the United States actually boiled down to five different ethical principles that actually aren't half bad, regardless of the critique you might have of the military. That they should be AI should be responsible, equitable, traceable, relatable, and governable. And if you think about the examples we saw just before my talk, in the conversation with Sarah and Jan-Christoph, you start seeing some of these examples play in. So how does this work in practice? It's complicated. There comes to be a moment when AI ethics frameworks began to emerge. One example is what happened with Project Maven. Project Maven is a computer vision project started by the Department of Defense in collaboration with academics and corporations, including Google. And it was a machine learning computer vision project that sought to distinguish objects and people in computer images. There was a fear at Google, a big concern, big fear, that this technology could be used for drone targeting, for warfare. And there was a big protest at Google. 4,000 people signed a petition, and a number of Google employees resigned. This is part of the open letter that they wrote. And this very crazy image you see on the right with these robots is actually truly the Department of Defense badge image for Project Maven. Your Latin will surely be better than mine, but it basically says, "We're here to help." Project Maven was launched in 2017. The Google protests took place in 2018. And by 2019, Google had left Project Maven. But one of the outcomes of this in 2018, in the wake of that public relations crisis, Google published its set of objectives for AI applications. Now you might see these and they're fairly simplistic and they don't give you a lot to go on if you're an engineer within a company. It turns out they don't give you a lot to go on either if you're in the public, but I'll get to that public sphere part in just a moment. I have a friend who works at a Silicon Valley, Bay Area tech company who refers to what they call an AI ethics maturity life cycle. And as this friend puts it, when there is an AI crisis or ethics crisis, here's what happens. First, an issue gets raised within the organization. So if we talk about Project Maven, we see that Google employees didn't agree with what happened with Project Maven and said, there's an issue here. And someone with enough visibility and credibility gets management and executives to notice and to pay attention and to start interfacing with the public. Then someone, perhaps that person, is given a job in AI ethics, a title with AI ethics, maybe not any resources to back it up, but at least symbolically, they get the title, and a set of principles is published. Then the principles become actionable in the engineering process. What does this mean? It means internally, in different kinds of ways in different companies, ethics and ethical considerations become a part of the engineering process, a part of the about putting together the stories for agile sprints, for sprints and creating the technology. And in tracking bugs, even creating ethical debt in the system so that engineers need to come back and deal with the different problems as they arrive. And then finally, in this AI ethics maturity lifecycle, the practices are backed up by incentives, tools, and resources, and can be shared and optimized with an outside world. So we've seen this in a number of different places, whether we're looking at Microsoft or Salesforce or Google. We see different ways that this work spins back out. And where does it go after this? We will see. So that's what happens from an engineering perspective with these different kinds of principles inside of companies. And I want to be clear that I think that ethical frameworks are a good thing. But how do we know if they're any good? Or who they're good for? Or if they're even ethics? Remember at the beginning, we talked about the fact that most ethical conversations don't actually talk about ethics. They don't include a definition of what they mean by ethics. This is some study that we did internally with a group at Carnegie Mellon a few years ago. A lot of times, ethics can act as a window dressing or as a mask for the misdeeds of companies. It can be a way to check a box. Ethics can be a hedge or protection. It can be a hedge against litigation or a hedge against regulation. In the United States, we see someone like Mark Zuckerberg go before Congress to testify about why Facebook should not be regulated. Well, if you say you're ethical and you can demonstrate the ways that you're ethical, then maybe it's a hedge against regulation. And increasingly, we see this kind of get hyped up in the news that this is going to be the breakout year for AI ethics, or the AI ethics journey will reach new heights. And I find myself wondering, yes, but to what ends? Is it ethics or is it something else? And this isn't even a new tendency. Back in the 80s and 90s, a number of companies created chief ethics officers as a way to hedge against litigation. The thinking was that if they were to get sued, the fact that they had a chief ethics officer for white-collar crime cases might mean that the jury might go easier on the company. That was at least the thought. And it's a way to escape punishment. So this is a 2006 article, long before we were talking about AI ethics in this kind of way. There are a number of bad practices in ethics. So Luciano Floridi at the Oxford Internet Institute and his team, and many other people as well, have written about things like ethics shopping, where you try out a bunch of different ethics frameworks to see what's going to work best for you, or ethics blue washing. If you can think of the way that companies have kind of greenwashed their products or tried to compensate from a sustainability perspective, blue washing is the ethics version of that kind of greenwashing for tech companies. Ethics lobbying. I mentioned the Mark Zuckerberg example of showing up in front of Congress and trying to say, please don't legislate us in these kinds of ways. Don't regulate us. That's ethics lobbying. Ethics dumping is processing your ethics through a third-party country that has less restrictive considerations than your own. And then ethics shirking is just doing away with the thing altogether, avoiding your ethical duties. I've been working with the team over the last year that includes Vandana Subramanian, Jonah Conlon, and Nick Martellero to study, to do both a distant reading of AI ethics and a close reading of AI ethics. What do I mean by that? Distant reading is, of course, a term from Franco Moretti, the professor, who talks about getting up above a data set in order to understand the tendencies within it. I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean. We wanted to know whether AI ethics is making a difference in the public sphere and how the public comes to learn about this. We know engineers take it up eventually in different kinds of ways, but what about the general public? And again, are we talking about ethics or are we talking about something else? So we've done two things. First, we analyzed some 9,000 articles on medium.com. If you don't know Medium, it's a website where anybody can publish, anyone from, average person walking down the street to well-known publications who also publish their work on Medium, such as Wired or Fast Company. And we pulled a number of articles to look at their intersection between ethics and these other terms. And I apologize for all of the words on this slide, but let me tell you what you see. What we found is that Medium articles on ethics have in common these kinds of things, right? We see words like human, AI, bias, and moral. They're top terms in every category except for big data. And other important terms were about society and the social, weapons, technology, and principles. Weirdly enough, design talked about morals and society, but we didn't see other ethics-related terms in the top 10 or 20, including principles, virtue, philosophy, and system, which indicates that these approaches are maybe not using ethics approaches in a more traditional sense. And the pink terms here you see tend to be terms in common across the different areas of AI, machine learning, robotics, algorithms, design, governance, and big data. Something else very interesting. We see that articles on ethics and AI highlight the role of the human making the AI and the human experiencing the AI. We see the technologist called out. And we know this because if we flip it around and look at the opposite of that data set, we only see words about technical considerations and about things like algorithms and specifics about how to code. We also see that articles on Medium are a way to signal intention about engaging ethically with AI. We saw a lot of stuff about conferences, which at first I wanted to dismiss, but then I realized something again that Luciano Floridi has pointed out, that that there are 4 different reasons to engage with ethics. You first signal. You want to signal that your company is interested in it. You seek collaborators. You build awareness, and then you solve problems. At the introduction of this talk, Jan Christoph mentioned Herbert Simon and the goal of design to move to preferred futures, and that's indeed this notion of solving problems. So when we see people talking about AI ethics in conferences, it's a signal. I also want to point out that we did another study. We have studied almost 14,000 news articles from United States publications. So we looked at things like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, in order to understand how AI and ethics was covered in the popular press. So we did some keyword analyses, topic modeling, term frequency analysis. What did we learn? Well, one thing is, as we guessed, we've certainly seen a boom in when we began to talk about AI and ethics. This is going to be very, very difficult to read, I see, but we see also a set of common keywords and some notions that were in common across all of the articles. But we found some things that we found a little problematic. The word ethics only occurred 868 times across 617 documents. AI ethics occurred in 400 documents, and fewer than 25 documents actually talked about ethical principles or frameworks. We did find that in conjunction with crises, public relation crises of tech companies, we saw ethics boom, right? So we see conversations and terminology in conjunction with accountability, bias, moral, data, discrimination, and responsibility. When we talk about Facebook or when we talk about Google, we see bias, algorithm, and AI. So why? I mean, certainly news gravitates toward controversy. But one thing that I think is that maybe these AI and ethical concerns don't make it to the general public. We understand the big events, the Cambridge Analytica, but we don't understand the frameworks and the ways that we might all together come to an ethics of what's appropriate. And moreover, we see that these ethical frameworks could potentially be an attempt by tech companies to control the news coverage of their misdeeds. They become an example of crisis communication, but they don't think very much about how better to educate or inform or grow the public sphere question around ethics. So there are some future questions to take on. Effects of the negative press coverage of ethics, ethics and personal safety. Some people who work on ethics are finding themselves doxxed, which is when your personal information is revealed to the internet. Things like your home phone number, your cell number, your address. And again, looking at the coverage of AI ethics and the press and the impact of this coverage. So is it ethics or something else? AI ethics isn't often about the 5 traditional ethics approaches that I've talked about here. In fact, AI ethics is in some ways a brand, a human-centered approach to technology. That isn't a bad thing, but it's a question of what it is, because perhaps it's not entirely ethics the way that we've long talked about ethics. AI ethics may be a way to avoid litigation and regulation. AI ethics frameworks don't impact the everyday public, nor do they assist their understanding of technology. What opportunities might we have as designers, as journalists, as communicators, as technologists to get this right? How might we better educate our public about the ethics of technology if these ethical frameworks aren't doing it? AI ethics frameworks do signal the intentions of technologists and designers to do good and to do better and to consider the broader impact. Indeed, that's why we're here today. We're talking about humanizing technology. I fear a world where this is our only notion of ethics, that we have one meme and one framework, and we feel as though we've checked a box. I'd like to see a world where we look ahead and maybe in the next decade, we've better educated the public about what it is to make these decisions together. A something else is indeed better than nothing at all. Grazie mille.